Hello bakers! Today on Cooking with the Iron Maiden I'm going to show you how to make French bread. French bread has a nice thick crispy crust on it. If you want a softer crust, check out my recipe for Italian. But I like the nice crispy crust on the French bread, especially with steak I'm having for dinner tonight. So, this is a recipe from my favorite cookbook, The Wise Encyclopedia of Cookery. Now this is an older cookbook, so I have updated the recipe a little bit, eliminated a few of the steps, made it a little simpler. Before I get started, I've gone ahead and greased my bowl. I've just used some solid Crisco to grease the bowl, and I've left some extra grease in the bottom of the bowl so that when I put the dough in, I can turn it over and there'll be a little oil on the top. It'll keep the dough from getting a skin on it. I've also gone ahead and greased my Wagner double loaf pan. You can use any loaf pan. You can use a griddle. You can use a regular baking sheet, cookie sheet, whatever you got. This will make 2 small baguettes, 1 large loaf, or 12 to 18 rolls. Clean towel to put over the dough once it's made. So for my ingredients, I've got 2 teaspoons of sugar, 3½ cups of flour. Now I've already measured out my flour. Remember when you're scooping your flour to stir it up a little bit. If you don't, it'll get packed down and you can end up with too much. I've got 1 package of rapid rise yeast. Now since I'm using the yeast in a jar, that would be 2 1/4 or 7 grams of yeast. I've got 1½ teaspoons of salt. I've got a cup of warm water. It should feel warm to the touch if you were to stick your finger in it. I've got a tablespoon of oil. I'm using olive oil, but you could use vegetable oil, whatever you have handy. And I've got 1 egg white that I'm going to beat stiffly and put that into the dough. And I'm also going to need another egg white with a tablespoon of water to brush on the dough once it's rolled out, and a little cornmeal that I'll sprinkle on the baking pan to help prevent sticking. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to mix. I've already put 1 cup of my flour into my mixing bowl here. So that's 1 cup of flour into the mixing bowl. The other flour I've got reserved. And I'm going to add my yeast and sugar and salt to that, and we're just going to give that a quick stir just to mix it together. And I'm going to pour in my water, and I'll add this just kind of slowly. We don't want it to get too clumpy. And I'm adding my tablespoon of oil, and just scrape that bottom a little bit. Then I'm going to let this mix for about a minute, and while this is mixing, I'm going to beat my egg whites stiffly. So we'll let that mix on a low speed for about a minute, and I can beat my egg whites. So I'll see you back here in a minute once these are beaten up. Okay, the egg whites have been beaten. And my dough has been mixing, so I'm going to take and I'm going to switch from the paddle to my dough hook. Now if you don't have a dough hook, you can just stir in the rest of the flour by hand. And I'm going to take, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put these egg whites in, and I'm going to actually fold the egg whites into the mixture. A little bit different. This is the only bread I know where you fold egg whites in like that. So we're just going to fold those in. Just kind of a little chopping motion through the clumps of egg whites, down around the sides. And you can still have some lumps of egg whites in there. It doesn't really matter because we're going to knead in the rest of that flour and they'll get all smushed out when you do that. So that's good enough. And just clean off my spatula here. And now I'm going to add the remaining 2½ cups flour to the batter. And if your dough is too thin, you can add up to an extra ½ cup of flour. So I'm just going to turn this on low speed and just kind of let my flour in from the side. And we're going to let that mix in. As you can see, it's a fairly stiff dough, and that looks about right. It's taken a minute for all of that flour to combine. So I think that's pretty good. So as soon as that flour finishes, it forms into a ball here. So it's just about there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my mixer up to mid-speed on the mixer, and I'm going to let it knead for at least 8 to 10 minutes until we've got a smooth, silky dough. You can see right now, if you look at it, it's all kind of clumpy and knotty looking. When we're done, it'll be nice and smooth. Remember, always attend your mixer while you're doing this. It can start to walk, so you don't want your mixer walking off the counter on you. That's always a bad thing. So I'm going to set my timer, and I'll see you back here in 8 to 10 minutes. Okay, it's been about 8 minutes. Our dough is nice and smooth and silky now. So I'm going to go ahead and put it on my surface. I've already put a little flour on the work surface. I can use a little more. And now you can use regular flour or bread flour with this. I often use bread flour. I'm actually using regular flour today just because that's what I scooped when I went to grab it. I do like my little bench scraper here. It's really nice for getting under the dough and if it starts to stick. So you can also just use a pancake turner or any spatula. So I'm just going to knead the dough here real quick. Add a little more flour if it's still a little too sticky, but I always like to knead it by hand for a minute. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my dough and I'm going to smush it down into the bottom of my bowl, and I'm going to kind of press down a little bit, and that's going to get the oil from the bottom of the bowl onto the top of the dough, and then I'm going to turn it over, and that way there's oil on the top of my bread dough, which is going to keep it from getting a skin on it. Now I'm going to let this rise at least 1 hour. You can even give it an hour and a half. The longer you give it, the better flavor it'll have. So I'll see you back here in about an hour, hour and a half. All right, our dough has risen nicely, as you can see here. So we're going to punch the dough down, give it a quick knead, and we're going to divide it into whatever portions we want for our bread. You can make it one big loaf. You can make it into, like I said, 12 to 18 rolls, or 2 loaves, which is what I want to do. We need a little more here. So I'm just going to let the dough rest here now for 10 to 15 minutes. That's going to relax it a little bit, so it's going to make it easier to roll out in shape. So I'll put my towel back over it. While that's resting, I'm going to get my pan. I already greased my pan, but I want to sprinkle a little cornmeal on the pan. So I'm just going to take the pan and just sift a little bit of cornmeal from my hand onto the surface of the pan. And this will help prevent sticking. Cornmeal kind of acts like graphite. So that's ready. The other thing I need to do is remember that other egg white I mentioned? So I'm going to take this egg white, I've already broken it in the bowl, and now don't throw those yolks away. Remember, they're great for hollandaise. If you don't know how to make hollandaise, check out my video on it, but it's real great and works good with your veggies for dinner. So I've got a tablespoon of water here that I'm going to pour into the egg white, and I'm just going to take a fork and just break up the clumps of egg white, mix in the water a little bit, and I'm going to brush this over top of the bread dough after I shape it. So like I said, we'll let our dough rest at least 10 minutes, 15 minutes. We'll give it 15. We've got time today. And I'll see you back here and we'll shape out our loaves and put them in the pan. All right, the dough has been resting 15 minutes. I can roll the dough out now. I just like to use a glass for this, but make sure you use a thick glass. You don't want to use a real thin glass or press too hard. You can use a rolling pin, of course. But I'm just going to roll it out in a bit of a circle or square, whatever it comes out to here. Just enough to help give it some shape, give us a smooth side there. Stretch it a little by hand even. And all we're going to do is we're just going to take the dough and we're just going to roll it up into a log. Now the one thing you do want to make sure you do when you get to the end, you want to pinch it nice and tight. So I'm actually just going to, I'm really going to take the dough and I'm going to pinch it between my, I'm going to pull it up so it's tight, and I'm going to pinch it between my fingers so that I'm smushing that dough together and sealing that edge. And I'm just going to work the way down, tuck that end under a little bit, and then I'm going to go back and I'm going to take and I'm just going to smush that pinched edge, and I don't want a rough edge there. Pinch this other end. And we're going to take, and actually, you know, before I put it in my pan, let me just grab a knife, and I'm going to make some cuts about 2 inches apart, 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 inch deep, just along the top. My baguette pan works a little better for this. This pan's a little hard to cut down in there once I've put it in there. So I'm going to repeat that with this other one. Smush it out. A little more sprinkle of flour. Roll it out a little bit. Again, remember, if you're using a glass, don't press too hard. You don't want to break your glass. And then we're just going to take and roll it up again. Turn that edge under, tuck it in nice and tight, and just start rolling down. And when you get to the end, you're just going to pull this up and pinch. Pull it up and pinch. Pinch it nice and tight. Mush those dough pieces together. When you get down to the end, kind of pinch that in and tuck it in a little bit. And then we go back along and we smush that seam down. And we'll pinch this other end and just stretch it out a little bit so it's the right length. And we'll take our knife and we're going to make our cuts about every 2 inches. And we're just going to cut across the top. And we're going to put it in our pan. Now we're going to do 2 things before we let it start to rise. One is we're going to take some of our egg and water that we mixed up before, and we're going to brush that along the top of the dough. So I'm just going to paint the dough with this, and this is part of the secret of giving it a nice crust. So we'll paint that, we'll let that set aside. And now I'm going to take my towel, and I want to cover it with a damp towel. So I'm just going to take my towel and I'm going to run it under a little water. And I'm going to take the towel and I'm just going to twist it. I don't want it wet, but I want it damp. And the moisture is necessary, again, helps with the crust. We'll also add a pan with some steam in it in the oven. And I'm going to put this over my bread, but I don't want it actually touching the bread. I just want to make like a little tent here. So I'm actually going to take my glasses there, my towel, and I'm just going to set it across the glasses there, and I'm going to make a little tent. This way it won't get on the bread itself. But I've got a nice little moist tent for the bread to rise in. And again, that will help with our crust. So we're going to let this rise at least 45 minutes to an hour until it's doubled in size. And we'll put it in the oven and bake it. So I'll see you back here when it's ready to go in the oven. All right, it's been a little while. Our bread has risen nicely here. It's ready to go in the oven. So I've already turned my oven on to 375 degrees. And one of the other things I've done is I've put a pan of water in the bottom of the oven there. And that's going to produce some steam, which is going to help give us a nice crust. Now the cake or the bread needs to bake for an hour, but I'm going to stop it after 10 minutes and I'm going to brush it again with some egg whites. So I've set my timer for 10 minutes. I'll brush it with egg whites at 10 minutes, after another 10 minutes at 20 minutes, and then I'll let it cook the last 40 minutes in the oven. And that's going to help with the nice crust on it. So I'll see you back here in 10 minutes. All right, it's been 10 minutes. I'm going to take the bread out of the oven and I'm going to give it another brush with my beaten egg white here. So I'm just going to brush that along the top of the bread. Just give it a good brushing. Get it all covered. Again, this is going to help give you that nice crust on the bread. Okay, we'll pop it back in the oven. And we're going to set our timer for another 10 minutes. And we'll brush it again with some more egg white at that point, and then we'll let it finish baking. So I'll see you back here in 10. All right, it's been another 10 minutes, so we can take our loaf pan out. We're going to brush it again with some more egg white. So just brush it good with the egg white, get all the corners and surfaces and sides that you can reach. And again, that egg wash is going to give it a nice crust. So after we brush it again, we will pop it back in the oven. And this time we're going to set our timer for 40 minutes. So the total baking time is 1 hour. And like I said, you brush it after 10 minutes and then after another 10 minutes. And we'll set it for another 40 minutes. And then we'll take it out and we'll have some wonderful French bread for dinner. See you back here then. Okay, our timer has gone off. Our loaves look beautiful. And I'm just going to dump them right out on my wire rack here. And you can see we've got two nice, crusty, beautiful loaves of French bread. Hear that nice crust on them? So these are perfect. Might want to let them cool a few minutes, but if you want, you can go ahead and slice them right away and slather them with a little butter or olive oil if you prefer. And I'm just going to cut off a little piece, so it's going to be way too hot to bite. And we'll put some butter on that. And you've got a beautiful loaf of French bread ready to eat. Super yummy, nice crisp crust, perfect for your dinner, for your salad, for your steak, for whatever you like. So, I hope you've enjoyed today's baking lesson. French bread, easy to make, delicious. If so, please like and share, and please subscribe to this channel for more good cooking with the Iron Maiden. Happy baking!